We invite our dear attendees to please take their seats, and Mr. Ziad Hayek will be moderating the next discussion.
I will start here. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. We are about to start this panel on the transition to green energy. If you are not here for that, please, if you leave the room so that we can start our panel. We would really appreciate it. Thank you again. By way of introduction, as the speaker before me said, I'm the president of the World Association of PPP Units and Professionals. If you are interested in PPP, you have to be a member of Iepp. Please look us up, Iepp.org, WAPPP.org. And it is a great pleasure for me always to talk about PPP, because I think that PPP is crucial for the development of our nations, especially at a time of increased government indebtedness and greater need to rely on the private sector. PPP is often seen as a tool for public procurement, but we like to see PPP as a tool for development. And I think our region is in desperate need of that. I'm very pleased to introduce the panel speakers today. I start with Mr. Aatir Hannoura, who is Director of Public-Private Partnership at the Central Unit of the Ministry of Finance in Egypt. Engineer Hannoura has more than 39 years of professional experience in different capacities and business sectors. He holds a law degree from Cairo University, a diploma in large procurements from ILO, and a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Alexandria University. He has worked in senior capacities for the regional and local organizations and was chairman and CEO at Egyptian Countryside Development Company before working for the World Bank and joining the Ministry of Finance, where he helped establish the PPP unit. He has also helped draft and later amend Egypt's PPP legislation since 2011. He was appointed by the Minister of Finance to be the director of the PPP unit and has been responsible for PPP projects in utilities, transportation, healthcare, education, ports, and communication sectors. After that, Mr. Mohammed Berrada, he's Manager of Project Finance at MEA Power. Mohammed has 12 years of experience in project finance, private sector development finance, and financial advisory. Prior to joining MEA Power, he worked with the Neothermis, a renewable power company, where he was in charge of the structuring of project finance transactions in Africa. He also worked at the ICB, the private sector arm of the ISDB, where he was serving as the regional representative for North Africa. Mohammed holds a Master of Science in Management from HEC Paris and is a citizen of Morocco and Sweden. Mr. Nicolas Thévenot is Managing Director and Head of Corporate Banking at the Arab Petroleum Investments Corporation, APICorp. Nicolas is head of Eppicorp's corporate banking activities, which include financial advisory, project and asset-based finance, as well as trade, commodity, and Islamic finance. He was previously at Crédit Agricole and Suez as economist and then structured finance manager in the asset-based and project finance department. He is currently a member of the Credit and Investment Committee, of the Executive Management Committee, and of the Risk and Assets Liabilities Committees at Eppicorp, and he holds multiple postgraduate degrees in international economics, public policy, public administration from the Institut d'études politiques in Paris. I move on to our next panelist, Mr. Mohammed Atif. He's an economist and area manager at DNV. He has successfully positioned DNV as the leading energy transition advisory in the Middle East and has specific focus on the UAE and Saudi Arabia. He covers the entire energy value chain from hydrocarbons and CCS strategies through to renewables development and green hydrogen. He's also involved in intelligent networks, energy storage, and sustainable end use. He has supported decision makers throughout the MENA region and has completed executive courses in artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things, smart cities, and algorithmic business thinking at the MIT Sloan School of Management. And last but not least, Mr. Mohammed Hamra Kruha. He's a partner at Clifford Chance. He specializes in projects, project finance, and banking, both conventional and Islamic. He's a member of the New York and Paris bars and has relevant experience that's a bit too long, so I'm just going to shorten it a little bit. He has been advising on a proposed green ammonia project in the UAE, financing of BlackRock-led consortium, $15 billion acquisition of a stake in Aramco pipelines, on the $10 billion revolving credit facility for Saudi Aramco, which combined the $3 billion Islamic Murabaha facility, and on many projects in the water, power, and renewable energy sectors throughout the Gulf area. So it's a very high-powered panel. We are really fortunate to have them share their experience and their ideas with us. And so please, a round of applause, help me welcome them. Thank you very much. So I will start with asking each one of the panelists if you could please share with us how your firm or entity is involved in green energy and PPP, and what projects or initiatives are you involved with in this regard. If you could take only 3 minutes each, please. We'll start with Atir.
Thank you, Ziad. Actually, I use your word. The PPP is not only a financing tool, it's a development tool. Regarding the green energy, let me tell you what's happening in Egypt rather than any other place in the world. We are expanding in the wind, solar energy, big time. We're approaching 20% of the power generation in regards of the renewables. Now the new trend of hydrogen as well is going on. The PPP was the real main tool to attract the private sector and the financing agency to develop together the projects. The PPP, or the, let me tell you this, the solar energy, which is very famous everywhere in the world, which is the Bimban station. This was based on PPP structure with the so-called feed-in tariff. And this was expanded. The same, we are going on it now with a different approach. It's recycling waste, solid waste, municipal waste to energy through another set of feed-in tariff for this in this regard. We are tendering actually currently 8 projects as a pilot projects, and will expand to reach something 40-something projects accordingly with the same structure. So the PPPs actually is carrying on all the renewable energies in different directions, And we have a very stable contracts, tendering documents, and financing mechanism, compensation mechanisms, and this contract actually accommodates any kind of changes that might happen through over the contract period, which is almost 20 to 25 years.
Thank you very much. Hamad Barada.
Thanks, Ed. So Iepp Power is a developer, owner, and operator of renewable generation assets with a primary focus in Africa, the Middle East, and emerging Asia. We were created back in 2016, and since then we've been growing steadily. We've now a team of 70 people, and we have a portfolio of 3 gigawatts of renewable projects at different project life cycle. So renewable energy and green transition is really at the heart of what we do. We have today 3 operational projects, solar and wind in Jordan and Togo. We recently closed and reached financial close for projects in Burkina Faso and in Morocco. We're working in 2 big projects in Egypt, each of them 500 megawatt, one solar and another one wind. We are in Tunisia, where we were awarded a tender for a 100 megawatt solar plant. We look at many countries in Mali, in Chad, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Namibia. So we really believe, as a developer coming from the private sector, that private sector has a big role to play in PPP, and we're really committed to push forward this energy transition. Recently, we signed an MOU with the Egyptian authorities to develop a 500 megawatt green hydrogen project in Egypt, in Ain Sokhna. And we are looking also at projects in Mauritania, in Morocco, in Oman, in the same field. So really green energy is at the core of what we do and of who we are.
Thank you very much. Nicolas?
Yes, so Iepp Corp is the acronym for Arab Petroleum Investments Corporation, and its mission is to support the development of initially the hydrocarbon industry, and we widen it to the energy industry. And knowing that the energy sector is basically contributing to more than half of the greenhouse gas emissions in the MENA region, precisely 53% in fact in the GCC, one could consider that it's quite counterintuitive to associate Arab Petroleum Investments Corporation with green initiatives. But in fact, Iepp Corp has been at the forefront of these efforts to transform, in fact, the energy industry of the region towards a model that is more sustainable. And it started a long time back, in fact, because it was in 2013 that our board approved that we start considering renewable projects. And since then, we have done quite a lot, both from, in fact, the investment arm of the corporation and the corporate banking, the lending arm that I'm representing here. Through investment, we have an investment in Tafila, in Jordan, that is a 117 megawatt wind farm project. We are also an investor in Yellowdoor, that is in the distributed power business. The lending arm, we have joined and supported through project financing facilities, major utility scale projects in the region, particularly in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. We have also been providing equity bridge loans, also for renewable projects to many developers. And we have been supporting and in fact developing quite innovative structure for financing distributed power companies. The countries we have been working with are quite broad, in fact, in the region, from Morocco to Jordan, and including obviously Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Our clients are the major developers of the region. Only one is missing currently, it's AMEA, but I'm sure that it should happen soon. last two things. In 2021, we issued our first green bond, $750 million. It was, in fact, the first green bond being issued by an energy-related company in the MENA region, and the second in the world. It was 3 times oversubscribed, and it was quite a success, considering that it ended up with a pricing of mid-swap plus 40 bips. And we won an award from the banker. And last thing that I should mention is that in 2022, we signed with Islamic Development Bank a framework agreement to support green projects or sustainable projects in the energy space, particularly projects for countries that have difficult access to international money.
Thank you very much, Nicola. Mohammed Atif.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here today. DNV, we're a global Norwegian company. We have a purpose, and that purpose is to safeguard life, property, and the environment. We're actually 12,000 people strong. We're located in about 100 countries, and we are the world's largest renewables and energy transition advisory company, bar none. We like to say we are, anyway. Myself, I'm overlooking Middle East and Africa. I'm based in the UAE. One thing I would like to say is that, as well as the company, I am passionate about the energy transition. And the reason is, I do believe we have a climate crisis. I do believe that people now and generations now are going to have serious challenges if we don't move and invest now. And it's really nice when we have a symbiosis between the company and the personal vision as well.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Mohammed Hamra Kruha.
Thank you, Ziad. Well, I think just the good thing is that as we're going to each of the panel members, we, as Clifford Chance, the global leading law firm, probably work with every single one of these organizations on multiple projects and have done so for many, many years. So I won't go in detail as to all the projects we work on. I'll just focus on 3 things that we do for 3 different stakeholders in the green energy transition. With governments, we work on policy formulation, drafting legislation, benchmarking approaches in order to help drive the government side of the transition. We work closely with the European Union on certification and taxonomy, for example, which will be very important for the important evolution in the hydrogen space. We also have worked with a lot of the government-owned off-takers in the region as they transition towards green energy projects from traditional carbon-based projects. So that's on the government side. We also work closely with lenders, financial institutions across the board, DFIs, of course. IDB Group is one of our important clients in the region. We've worked significantly with them on fundraising as well as deployment of capital, and that's an important component of a number of jurisdictions where deals cannot be done without the involvement of DFIs. We also work with the wider environment of DFIs, part of the World Bank Group, etc. We also work with commercial banks, which often are partners in these financings and export agencies. And as we transition to a context where projects are more difficult to finance, we've had a long period with low interest rate environment, with low or ever-decreasing tariffs and cost of supply chain. This is now becoming more difficult. So our relationships with the full array of financing is going to come to be brought together. And then with developers such as Iepp Power and investors, we help structure and work with developers to try to get into new markets, to try to bring structures that have been tried and tested in some jurisdictions to new markets. But we also work with more traditional oil companies, energy companies who are trying to redeploy themselves, to transition themselves into green energy projects. So, Ziad, you mentioned Aramco as one project we worked on where there is monetization of existing assets in order to deploy into green energy. We do that with NOCs and IOCs across the world. So that's very good.
Thank you very much. I think basically what you have on the panel here are all the experts you need if you are interested in energy transition. You have the public sector, you have a developer of projects, you have a banker, you have a consultant on the subject, and you have a lawyer. And they are all top experts in their fields. So you couldn't think of a better team if you're interested in energy transition. I'd like to start our discussion with Nicolas and ask you, Nicolas, from your perspective as a banker that has worked in the region for many years now, what are your general observations on the development of the renewable energy sector in the region, especially as it regards PPP?
Indeed. Again,
and 4 minutes, please.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Again, something that is quite counterintuitive for many people is that the Middle East has become truly, in fact, a kind of lab for energy transition. And I would like only to give an example that is, in fact, the green hydrogen project NEOM in Saudi Arabia, which is the first of that scale in the world. And in fact, as we can see, the Middle East is transforming itself from an hydrocarbon-based model to an energy-based model. And an energy-based that is, in fact, composed of a mix where the renewable energy will take quite a big chunk. To give an example, Saudi Arabia is envisaging by 2035, I'm sorry, to get to 50% of its electricity coming from renewable sources. That is significant. This is the first point. The second point is with regard to the Iepp model. It's a model that has been well utilized, in fact, in the region for many years. I would say it started, in fact, in Morocco in the 90s. The first projects where the private sector was involved was in Morocco, and at the time there was even a renewable project. It was close to 10 years. It was a wind farm, and then it has continued elsewhere in the GCC, definitely, starting at the end of the first half of the first decade of this century, and later on, in fact, we have seen Egypt and Jordan following. So the Iepp model is well known in the region. There are certain countries, indeed, that are still on the learning curve. I would consider Iraq, for example, where there is still, in fact, work in progress in order for the authorities to get familiar with such kind of structures. But let's look a few figures only to give some colors to what I have said. You look at Saudi Arabia. Currently, SEC is still in control of 40.5 gigawatt of capacity installed, but IPPs are now representing close to 20 gigawatt. So it's quite significant. In Bahrain, most of the power generated is generated through IPPs. It's around 80%. In the UAE, you look at TAQA. TAQA is doing its best to leverage its partnership. In fact, and now you have close also to 20, in fact, gigawatt that are being done through IPPs. In Dubai, it's slightly different. DIWA likes to come into the consortium post-bid and keep the majority. In Oman, most likely Oman is the one that has gone the farthest, particularly when it comes to renewable, because as you know, in fact, they have sold, in fact, 49% of their power transition utility in 2019. Egypt, because we are in Egypt today, I think it's important to see, in fact, what have been the achievements that are very impressive. because we can say that it started, in fact, in the 2015, 2016, and only we mentioned Benban. Benban has been an impressive success. In fact, it's the largest PV solar park in Africa, as we all know. It has been led by private developers of top tier. Indeed, commercial banks have not yet joined massively. Basically, it's still multilateral development banks and development agencies that have been supporting the financing. But we can expect this to change quite rapidly.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just trying to keep time.
You're right. Thank you.
Mohammed Atif, from your perspective, when we spoke, your perspective as an advisor, when we spoke, you told me bankability is the most important thing that's going on now. Tell us why is that, and what's your perspective on bankability in the region as it is today?
Okay, thanks, Iyad. So I'll talk from a techno-economic perspective. I mean, in essence, what we have seen in this region and many parts of the world, a lot of these renewable projects, you find they're 70, 80% debt financed. So what has to happen with a new technology is the investor, from the equity side and the debt side, they need some confidence. They need confidence on the technology, they need confidence on the operation, they need confidence on the supply chain, they need confidence on the off-taker and the whole sort of kind of industry setup. Now, with industries that are established, obviously the perceived technological risk is less. But as you start getting new industries in which the renewables industry was, the technical advisory, the due diligence becomes extremely important. And we're seeing that very specifically now in the sphere of green hydrogen. So the same questions are coming up. Technology risk. Does this technology work? Can it be scaled up? Do we have the supply chain in place? What about the cost per unit of production, the dollar per kilogram? Will that come down? Will there be a learning effect? What will the offtake agreement look like? What's the creditworthiness and what are the risks? What are the warranty risks? What are the operational risks? So we help our stakeholders that look at all of these issues to gradually reduce that techno-economic risk to help make that project bankable, financeable, and sustainable. And that's why it's so important.
Thank you very much. Mohammed Barada, from your perspective as a developer, what do you see as the important success factors what are the factors that can make a PPP successful in a renewable energy project, especially now during this transition phase?
Yeah, so I think this is a very important topic and a recurrent one, and there's a lot of literature there. And I don't think that, I mean, we would need probably a one-day session to go through all the success factors, because there are many of them. And one of them are those that Mohammed said about the bankability of the PPP and of the related aspect of it. But I would like to maybe focus on 2 or 3 items which from our perspective are important. The first one, which is probably the most obvious, is the fact that the project needs to make sense in both, from both an economic and social point of view. For example, when we're talking about energy PPP, the projects need to be inclusive, meaning that it needs to provide access to electricity to population which don't have access to electricity. It needs to be, from an economic point of view, interesting for the country by decreasing the cost of energy. So when all of these aspects are met, it enables an alignment of objectives between the different counterparts and stakeholders. Again, PPP are complex projects. You have stakeholders with different objectives. You have lenders, you have private sector, you have public sector, you name it. And when you achieve this, you have this alignment of objectives which isn't the way forward. The second point, which is also very important, is the strong support and willingness at highest level from the state. And what we've noticed in our project is that the more the the authorities are providing the necessary leadership in PPP, and the more the PPP has a chance to be a success, because when the state is committed, it allows to overcome a number of challenges related to the necessary reforms, to the necessary guarantees that need to be provided, to the mappability aspects. So all of this is important. Another point which is also important for us, and maybe the most important one actually, is the regulatory framework. So again, we're talking about different counterparts, different stakeholders. We're talking about complex contractual arrangements. So what we've noticed is that whenever you have a PPP law in a country, whenever you have a sort of agency driving the development of renewable energy in a country, like for example in Egypt with NREA, in Mazen in Morocco, South Africa, whenever you see that, there is a big chance of having a sound PPP framework and success of PPP. And I would like to end with one final thing, and I think it's important because we have here, and you said in the beginning, many actors coming from different backgrounds, is the capacity building. This is important because actually it's not a lack of investment to bridge the gap in terms of infrastructure and energy projects in Africa, for example, or other emerging countries. There is also a big lack of investment in the pre-PPP phase. And I think IDB, APICORP, other GFIs, but also lawyers and all the counterparts have a big role to play here, so that they enable this emergence of PPP.
Great, thank you very much. Indeed, it is a bit ironic that at a time when governments are highly indebted and they need the private sector to step up and finance PPP projects, it is the same time that we have global geopolitical uncertainty, we have higher increasing inflation and many other problems. And so the private sector now needs the government involvement through assurances, guarantees, or other mechanisms, even more than they did before. So it's quite an ironic situation. Mohammed Hamrak Ruha, from your perspective as a lawyer, and this context that we are talking about, how is that affecting the contractual relationships of PPPs? How is it changing it? What is the effect on the force majeure clauses and other related issues?
Thank you, Ziad. I think overall, as we come out from what we thought was going to be the end of a period of disruption due to the pandemic, and we enter into a new period of disruption with constrained supply chain, increased interest rates. Overall, on existing projects, on water projects, I think we can probably take comfort that the model that has been developed and put in place have overall worked reasonably well. We haven't had a full meltdown of a number of these project contractual provisions, which dealt with delayed construction, delayed commissioning, and force majeure, were able to be implemented, and with some reasonable approach on both sides, understanding the specific circumstances. I think that overall has worked pretty well. I think the issue, however, is to make sure that we continue to take a pragmatic approach on the new projects. We are going to see a increased burden on government budgets going forward, with COVID-related spending for many years, increased energy bill for a lot of net importers of hydrocarbons that ultimately are going to push for a more balanced approach on the government budget in some jurisdictions, but also in our jurisdiction, even in some of the more wealthy GCC jurisdictions, actually is to try to see how you can use government spending to finance specific assets carved out in order to facilitate the investment. For example, storage and transport infrastructure for hydrogen projects. So that's not going to be necessarily something which can be project financed, but to enable those investments, building oversized to allow future projects to come into play. So really, I think it's to take comfort from the existing financial contractual framework and make sure that we build on the success stories. We mentioned Benban as one of the examples. It allowed Egypt to do a huge leapfrog in terms of building capacity in human capital, people who supply chain, local chain, localized in terms of capacity for these projects, and also establish and test a contractual framework that can be rolled out in Egypt on other projects and elsewhere.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So, Ater Hanoura, you are a policymaker. You are the senior most executive in the Egyptian government on PPP. You've heard the views of the private sector regarding the green transition to green energy. Your comments and thoughts, please.
Actually, the role of the PPP Central Unit in this regard is to make all these guys happy. Without it, we don't have a project.
Yes.
And to achieve this, it's known to everybody that the private sector is the technology leader. The private sector is the entities drive the technology, and accordingly, we have to, number one, do the project preparation properly. Without this, we have the project at risk. We might have the project structured in a way that we can put some risks on the private sector or the banks. It will turn the project more expensive, or the private sector, all the banks would leave the project and abandon it. And to put all this together and to unleash the power of the private sector, we normally put the technical specs, as you know, in the output form. So we describe the output specs and leave all the inputs to the private sector to put the technology that is the latest economic technology that they can provide and maintain throughout the project. And this would be of the benefit of the government at the end of the day. And during the preparation of the project, we have to maintain a real dialogue with the market players, the private sector, the banks, and definitely our legal transactions. So we have to come out with a real structure that once we push it to the market, we have the attraction of the private sector, of the technical guys, of the legal advisors, and basically the banks. All this with the putting in consideration the interest and the requirement of the government. So without this three pillars or the three pivots, we don't have a project. The interest of the government, the private sector attraction, and the banks. And this is actually the main tough role of the PPP units, especially it takes time, especially in preparation, and the politician hates time. Thank you.
It's very true. It's the most difficult situation to be in. You have, if you're in PPP, like Ater is the head of a PPP unit, you have to be an expert on finance because you have to understand financing projects and financing models, etc. You have to be an expert on legal matters because you have to understand contract negotiation with the private sector and otherwise. You have to be an expert on technical matters because one day you're working on roads, the next day you're working on power plants. You have to be expert on, you have to be politically astute because you have to deal with members of parliament and with ministers. You have to understand the local environment as well as the international environment. You have to know how to create policy, put policy in place, how to develop programs and prioritize your PPP projects, and you have to understand project management because it's part of what you're doing. So I don't envy you, Ater. It is a huge responsibility. I'd like to open the floor for questions, please, from the audience, if there are any. I think everybody seems to be satisfied with what they heard. But I am curious about one last thing I will ask you guys to comment on. Because we are at the Islamic Development Bank conference, can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on Islamic financing or your experience with Islamic financing. If I may start with Hamad Akruha and work this way, and then we'll end this session. Briefly, please, 1 minute or
Sure.
two.
Thank you. You know, Islamic financing is not new to the region, and actually, the good thing is that it is really allowing an additional pool of liquidity to be deployed in jurisdictions, some which are we can see as more suited, and others where actually there can be a new player. The reality is Islamic finance or project financing or greenfield project development is extremely well suited, and actually it allows the full spectrum of risk sharing to be allocated depending on the appetite of the Islamic funder. You can go from a full equity risk on a mudaraba basis all the way through to a mudaraba basis which is similar to a conventional risk allocation, really depending on the type of investor, the maturity of the funders. And really, the reality is we can't afford, as a region, not to use the strength and the depth of the Islamic finance sources of financing, both for initial greenfield project financing, but tomorrow for green book, green bonds, free up some capacity by taking out existing projects. We just worked with IDB, ICD, and EBRD on the refinancing and green bond for 6 of scattered projects in Benban to free up some capacity, do a capital market solution. Again, the idea is to recycle capital. That can be done through soft mini-perm structure, short-term financing, but also make sure that the capital market comes in. I know Nicola and I had good chats about it. It's also very hard to be able to use that solution. So the depth is there, the appetite is there. There's actually not enough product to meet the demand. So I think it's quite important.
We need to find more projects. You don't have to, but if you feel like it, Hamad, Atif, if you want to say something on the subject or not, I'm sorry. You don't have to.
I can say a few quick words. Yeah, I mean, I'll simply add that one of the key roles that we play is something called the lender's technical advisor. And essentially, when you have a lender using whatever form of instruments they may use, and you have the developer/investor, we come in as that independent party to really look at all of the risk chain, the entire value chain. As I mentioned earlier on again, I'm really excited about Islamic finance stepping up, and not just in this region, to go beyond this region. And we have played that role before of being that independent advisor, and I think we can still play that pivotal role to help more financial instruments, more investment, more lending go into these projects and drive the energy transition. And coming right now, right now, I think at this excellent event, leading also up to COP27, and with all the announcements we've heard, especially in this region, with respect to green hydrogen, I think this is a huge opportunity, not just for developers, investors, but also for Islamic finance to really come in and help drive that energy transition.
Great, thanks. Nicolas Thévenot?
Yes, I would agree with Mohamed that, well, the problem for Islamic banks to find their place, in fact, in the financing of these projects is due to 2 issues. The tenor, because these are very long tenors. We are talking, even if there is a mini-perm, nevertheless, at the end of the day, you commit to a long tenor that is easily 20 years and above. And pricing, because pricing is extremely tight. This is why, in fact, it has been possible, in addition, obviously, to the drastic reduction of the price of panels, that the kilowatt-hour price has come down so significantly. You see, it's tenor and pricing. And this is difficult for Islamic banks. Nevertheless, there are various options that are still there. Equity bridge loans, this is definitely something very important for developers in order to boost the returns of an investment. and this is normally medium term, so even medium term between 2 to 5, 7 years, and this is definitely very suitable for Islamic banks. Also, we should expect once these projects have been completed and have had a few years of operations, it would not be completely unthinkable to have eventually a refinancing through the capital market, meaning Sukuk. That could be a very good venue for the Islamic banks to join. And last point, just touching upon it, and there was an article not long ago in an Islamic review or newsletter. It's obviously the possibility, and this is very suitable for Islamic banks, the origin of which is a trade finance. It's the financing of carbon credits. But this is another topic that would require hours of discussion. But this is another also element, you see, or venue for Islamic banks to fully participate in such deals.
In the new carbon situation. Mohammed Barada?
Yeah, so I think my colleagues have said it all, but I would like maybe to stress out that the number of case studies where Islamic finance cohabitates with conventional finance in PPPs are today, I mean, a high number. So, and we at Iepp Power, we have a project in Jordan called Abu. It's a 50 megawatt project where we structure it with IFC and Islamic Development Bank through an Ijara Islamic finance product. And I think it's one of the first of its kind in the region. So I think today this debate about is Islamic finance well suited for PPP, I think it's not necessary because it has proven to be the case. And I would add that it's not only that Islamic finance is well suited, it's necessary to tap into additional funds and provide these necessary funds that we need in IDB member countries, for example, and all these African countries where we as a developer we're looking to. And this is why we're having a continuous discussion with IDB, with ICG, because we believe that this is also one important source for funding our project in the same terms that other DFIs like IFC, African Development Bank, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you very much. Atir?
I'll have a lot of things to say in this.
A lot of things to say.
The problem is that it's very strange to find that the Islamic financing is not well presented in the PPP market, not only in Egypt, in the region and outside the region. It's because, sorry for that, being in the Islamic Development Bank, but the Islamic financing in the IFIs or even the commercial banks are not presenting themselves properly in PPP. The PPP by nature is very much is most suitable for Islamic financing rather than other financing. However, we go for the traditional project financing rather than the Islamic financing. The Islamic financing, when we start talking to them, they start bombarding us with very nice wording, ijara, mudarba, gharar, darar, and all that kind of words that most people does not understand. And they come out with a term sheet that looks like more expensive than traditional. However, if you calculate the total cost of ownership, the Islamic financing might be much more cheaper, or at least it mitigates a lot of risks in the traditional financing. However, the presentation by the end of the day is not well presented to the private sector. Private sector is very sensitive. The PPPs are very sensitive to the cost of financing and the risks of financing. And if this is not educated well to us and to the market and to the banks and other bankers, I think this is the situation that we have. There is a lot of understanding that each and every one, the lawyers, the private sector, and the public sector, and the consultants, because they are giving the advice, have to be well educated and well exposed to the Islamic Development Bank. Otherwise, we'll have one transaction every 40, 50 transactions in the region. Sorry to say this and to end the session this way, but this is the fact. Thank you.
I have to say that it's my experience as well in many ways. We need more awareness, and I think the private sector has to understand, because they normally come to Islamic financing thinking it's like debt. They compare it to a loan from a bank. And actually Islamic financing has many aspects of it of equity, right? Because there's, it has some features of equity. So it should be looked more as perhaps compared to mezzanine financing rather than compared to senior debt. And hopefully there will be a lot more education on this, especially with the private sector. On this note, we end our session today. Thank you very much for participating, for listening to us. Please join me for a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Iepp, and thank you to all the distinguished speakers. Thank you all very much. And I ask you to kindly stay in your seats, as our final session will be starting in a short while. Our next speaker is arriving very shortly. Thank you.